Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. I'm Humble and we're back on the MK again today. Last week we did a little bit of an intro with wiring and the systems we'll be using. Today we're going to start diving in a little bit deeper from that surface level and getting into the installation of the wiring harness itself, routing that wiring harness, and choosing a location for our two primary systems, the PD16 and the Elite 1500. That is our primary power distribution and ECU that we've chosen for this project. Those are going to be the two largest bits of wiring. I've already shown you some of that. So today we're going to start by getting our PDM wiring sort of in place loosely, at least pointed in the right directions, front or rear. So let me grab the GoPro and we'll get this process started. This is going to be the best angle, but it'll do for today. So first up, I want to show you some of the nice things that I like about the Haltec products, kind of learning as I go. One of the things I really appreciate is Haltec, like other manufacturers, do supply a simple wiring diagram that shows our pinouts, where everything should go, and one thing that we will get to later is it details the fuse box that would be included on your Haltec 1500 Elite or such engine wiring harness for the ECU. We will get to that later. We're not going to pay much attention to it now because that's not on the PD16 harness. This details our kind of basic connections out, how everything is grouped up. And while we're going to be paying attention to some of this, really what I wanted to point out is the other sheet. So if you open up the Haltec software, you start configuring all your devices before you touch anything. I will say that's a little bit more of an advanced topic because that assumes that you've either built one or multiple cars previously, that you've already wired cars, so you're familiar with most ECUs or PDMs. And the way that works is you would go into the software and start assigning circuits to devices that you know you'll be using. So for our case, it's a car. We know it's going to have headlights, tail lights, turn signals, brake lights, reverse lights, and so on. So those are all circuits that we can go in and assign. And once you've done that, you can get a report much like this that will detail what pins are in use and why or where, as well as pins that are not in use and what's available. Why this is important is I can look at this cheat sheet when going through our wiring harness down here, and when I start routing, I can route forward or backward in the car just off of this initial document. Now, I will have to expand some things in the harness, like I will need to add additional grounds. I'll need to add additional forks because there's only going to be one pinout for our, let's say, our right turn signals. But that right turn signal has to go to the headlight stock. It has to go out to our right side fender. It has to go back to our rear right light, and so on. And like, there's only one output for our brake lights, but that has to go to both rear brake lights, and so on and so forth. So that we will have to add forks in the harness down the road. We'll get to that point, but right now we just simply want to start our basic wiring routing, and we want to look for potential pitfalls. So this is mechanical devices, anywhere that it can get caught, anywhere that it can abrade against sharp corners or sharp points. We want to be wary of potential heat sources. After I do some initial routing, I'm going to grab the camera and pull it up front to the car, and I'm going to talk about our routing in the engine bay versus starting here at the bulkhead and working our way to the back of the car. First steps first, we have our kind of wiring harness document. I'm going to grab our harness and we're going to start going through and reading our pinout and basically saying front or back as we go through the harness. Back out of time lapse now, making a little bit more of a mess, but you saw me start to route some of these wires around. So the method to my madness is this branch, which comes down through the grommet and off to that side of the car. That's going to be routed forward through the engine bay. This bundle is mostly destined for the back of the car, the rear of the chassis, but also includes things that are going to be stopping in the tunnel. So that is our reverse switch, our neutral switch, I think e-brake lever, that sort of stuff. That's all going to be stopping in the tunnel, but it's still part of the rear leg that goes to the back of the car. And then, of course, at the back of the car is like tail lights, reverse light, fuel pump, all that sort of stuff. That's all going to be on the rear leg. And so that's in this bundle here. Something I didn't know and I'd actually prepared to do myself, and is a positive note about the harness that Haltec supplies, is so you have things like, so in these bundles, set this aside, you have this bundle of black and wire, or I should say black with a white stripe wires. So each of the wires in this bundle is actually for a sensor ground. And rather than me splicing the harness and having to make my own set like this, well, they do that already for all of the sensor inputs or analog voltage inputs, that sort of thing. They have one of these wires. This orange bundle, well, there's only one in here now, but this is for all of the analog voltage inputs. So this is your 5-volt source. And as you can see, I've got one to the back and I've got a couple going up to the front for the various sensors I'm using. So for the rear, that goes to our fuel gauge. And for the front, that goes to our brake pressure sensors. So I've included those sensors on the chassis side of the harness. Rather than on the engine side. It just sort of breaks out easier that way, and I had to run out of inputs on the ECU, so that's where those sensors just have to live. Throughout me sorting these wires, you saw me disappear for a little bit, and what I was doing is I was grabbing the bundle of wires that I hadn't gone through yet, and I was just combing them down so that they wouldn't tangle as easily all the way down out to the end. So that when I pulled one or two wires through, it would pull through easily and it wouldn't tangle the bunch. That helps a little bit when you're trying to manage a huge bundle of wires like that. So just a quick little tip to pass along. So I'm going to do some research really quick about what I want to do with this circuit, and then I'll be back after that. I've run the wiring, separated our groups, and really what we have here is 3 groups going on. Well, technically 4, but we'll say 3 main ones. So there's a leg that comes up here, and actually if I come around to this side of the car, I can show you my routing. So we have one leg that comes down, it'll follow inside of the tunnel here, make the corner where it'll have a branch that goes down to pick up our sensors on the brake and clutch, and then another leg that comes up. It's going to follow the chassis rail all the way forward. Our headlights, fan, water pump, turn signals, all that stuff is going to be following this leg up here to the front of the car. And I want to try and tuck it under this chassis rail. So up and under, anything that needs to go to the middle for our fans here is just going to, tuck right underneath this rail, or maybe off to the side here and then follow along. Either or are good options. Back over on this side, I have this bundle, and this is for stuff that's under the dash. That could be our wipers, our park circuit. This is for our ignition switch and our main power output. So I think I mentioned before that we have these red wires with a white stripe, and there's 3 of them, and they're all linked together, and they all come off of one circuit. Or I should say it's pink with a red stripe, which is our main output 1. It says just generic main power, whatever. Well, that's true. Is you've got 3 of these wires, a single 8 amp circuit. This is going to serve as our main power. So this is going to drive like main power relays. This is going to provide power to our dash and our button keypad. Yeah, so when the PDU gets power, or when the PD16 gets power, then everything else should light up using this circuit. For the third set of wires, we're going to go follow this batch down. We're going to come down through the tunnel and then into the back of the car. I thought I was going to run all down one side, but I think it's just easier and a little bit neater if I keep the wires on the driver's side until we're past the transmission, and then cut over to the passenger side here next to the parking brake, just because it's really, really tight here against the chassis rail and everything. And with this being able to move, I don't want that to be a potential abrasion point for the harness. So just by cutting over and then along this side, there's plenty of room. And so that's going to come in the back of the car. And I think for routing, I'm just going to have it come up and around and down this leg, and then it'll run to our fuel tank for our fuel pump and our level sensor. Our lights will have a leg that come off of that, and so on. As for the fuel pump setup, I guess our fuel plumbing, I was playing with this a couple different ways. It's kind of a funky setup because I have this big fuel filter in here, and I wanted to just keep it attached to the fuel pressure regulator to make it easy to package. So keeping that all together is one thing, but managing its size and length and where everything is routing has been a little bit of a pain, but it just took some thinking. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have our output from the pump go to our filter first, then our pressure regulator. Our output from the regulator will come back out and then right back into the tank with as short a route as we can. And then our output from the regulator will go forward to the engine. And I think I've decided I'm just going to run a single leg deadhead style up to the front. And that's just going to be that. And then keeping everything back here on top of the tank just makes the most sense. I did decide to move our fuel pressure sensor to the front to simplify the wiring, and because where I was trying to package this in different ways, the sensor just stuck out too far with the sensor and the wiring. So I decided to put it on the end of the fuel rail up here. So it's going to live up here just on the end of the fuel rail, and that'll work out well enough because I can run all of my sensor wiring in one bundle, and all the engine wiring will just be right here. So I'll need to come up with a mount to keep this from bouncing around. It can't hang like that. So I'll have to build a little mount that just supports this end nice and rigidly, and that'll be that. Right now I have this T-piece in here. I can replace this with just a 90, although it is tempting to just keep this T-piece here with a cap. And if I do need to drain the tank or anything like that in the future, I can just pull this cap and run a hose out the back and make it nice and easy. So I may leave that on, I may take it off. I haven't really decided yet. So our last leg for wiring are these two wires here. And as I mentioned before, we're gonna have basically a trunk harness just for the engine side. And what I'm thinking is these two will be in that, but we'll run it along the side here with this other bundle, but separately. And I want to have a bulkhead connector that sits just right here. And that'll kind of help hide this other harness below it. But then we'll have just a single disconnect right here that you know, should anything happen and we need to pull the motor really quick, we can just disconnect that wiring harness and pop everything out of the way. Whether it sits here or further back here where it's not going to be in the way, pulling the engine and trans out, I haven't decided yet, but I do want to have a disconnect somewhere, you know, on or around the engine to make pulling the engine easier without having to strip the whole harness off of it. When it comes to running our Elite wiring, I'm going to run all of this up here into a single trunk, and then beginning our engine routing just from this trunk, which will probably tuck right in here above the starter, and just keep it on the cold side of the engine, most of the harness hidden, and then bring what we need to up and through. So up and around through here for our sensors in the back, up in the middle here for our injectors. I'll have to figure out where the optimal placement for our coil harness will be, either off the back or off the back here, which I might just do. I might just run everything up and into the valley, keep it nice and tucked in the back of the engine there. But yeah, that's where we're at the moment. I have to give a shout out to Haltec for these kind of cheat sheets that you can print out. I've already gone through a couple of changes and have had to reprint these sheets a couple of times. And then last but not least, we have some extra wire. We have an extra 5 volts, some extra ground lines, and then a couple channels that we didn't end up using on the PDM. And so I'll de-pin these, pull them out of the connector. For these guys, because they're all ganged up, we just have to trim it and terminate, and we'll just tuck it into the harness, and that'll be that. You just want to make sure you don't have a possibility for a short or anything like that. So when I cut them, I'll just put a little bit of heat shrink on the end, and then they'll be good to go. So that's going to do it for this episode. Well, I should say, I was going to say one harness down, but it isn't yet. We're just barely getting started. So the PD16 harness is staged. Let's call it that. It's staged. Next up is we're going to do the Elite 1500. We're going to get that harness in and staged, more or less, get it ready. And then we can work at combining what we need to combine, keeping separate what we want to keep separate, because these two harnesses are inevitably intertwined because of just the nature of the PD16 supplying power for the different items and so on. mixed usage between chassis and engine, so on and so forth. So I was going to try and keep them separate, but I don't think that's going to happen. That being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.